Thanks and welcome. Thanks for coming out today. I'm going to talk to you about the problem of emerging infectious diseases. So these are things like SARS, Ebola, avian influenza that are either present in a human population for the first time or they're posing a new risk in a new population. In the case of Ebola, which claims over 11,000 lives during 2013 and 2014, we saw a virus with origins in Guinea. So I'm going to start with a little quiz to test your knowledge of Guinea. What do we think the life expectancy is in Guinea today? Just shout out some answers.
65. 42%.
All right, and how about in 1940? What do you think the life expectancy in Guinea was?
80. 60.
Okay, so I asked you this. It was actually around 30 in 1940, and it's gone up to around 60 today. Child mortality, this is the percentage of children who die before they reach the age of 5. It's gone from somewhere in the neighborhood of 35% to 9% today. Still too high, but this is great evidence that we've made enormous strides in a number of areas in public health since 1940. And this is across different measures in different countries. But when you ask even an educated audience, we tend to think that the past was better than it was and the present is worse than it is. Why am I prefacing with this? Well, because I want you to really understand that this problem that I'm talking about today is not a bad thing among other bad trends. It's truly an outlier. And that is, since 1940, the number of new diseases that we've seen worldwide has quadrupled. So we should expect to see over 100 new pathogens originate in this decade. And this is in contrast to progress in so many other fields and areas in public health. Now, of these events that we have new pathogens emerging, around 30% are due to clinical factors like antibiotic resistance. I'm interested in the remainder, which is around 70%, and these have origins in wildlife. So zoonotic spillover is typically the origin of these 70% of emerging diseases. Now, why have we seen this over the past several decades? The answer is it's complex, but the thing that I want you to take away from today's talk is that it's due to rapid change across ecosystems, populations, and transportation networks. So here's a great example. In 1979, we have Shenzhen, China, here on the left. The population in Shenzhen in 1979 was around the size of the small town in Ohio I grew up in, 30,000. Today, Shenzhen is about the same size as New York City, has a population of over 10 million. And here we have Hong Kong in the 70s versus Hong Kong in the same area today. We've seen enormous change in these areas. But how do you quantify this change? That's the question that I'm interested in. These photos are interesting, but they don't necessarily allow us to compare location to location. So I've been exploring this issue through Earth observation technology. So these are satellites in orbit that can take measurements for us over very large periods of time. So this is that same area, Pearl River Delta, from 1979 to a few years ago. And we can see that this area has experienced enormous population change. We have a filter on this, so the growth of urban areas is kind of in the gray color there. And this is something that we can actually measure and quantify then on a pixel-by-pixel basis. Now, how do we do this in our group? Well, when I tell people about this, I was talking with a prominent local business leader, and he said, "You can measure germs from space?" And he was looking at me with this kind of horrified look, and I could tell that he thought we were examining germs with a satellite, and he was kind of scared about, well, what else could we see? And that's really not the case. We're actually measuring biological and chemical factors through spectroscopy that we have on our satellites in orbit. And that can be that can be correlated and calibrated with measurements of biodiversity, for example, through something like the Shannon Index. So based on the chemical composition of vegetation, for example, which is sensitive and has a spectral signature in the red and near-infrared wavelengths, we can actually convert a landscape in the visible spectrum, this is in the Amazon here on the left, to a very specific biodiversity map on a hectare by hectare basis using this airborne spectroscopy. Now, to determine if something is changing and it's actually significant or if it's just part of seasonal variation, we use change detection algorithms. So we can compare very large historical records with what's going on currently to determine if something like that vegetation index I mentioned, the NDVI, or normalized difference vegetation index, is deviating from something that's a seasonal difference or if we're actually experiencing a significant trend in an area. So how have we applied this in our group? Well, I have some cases for you, and I think Robin will get the lights so you can see this better. In 2007, there was emergence of Bundibugyo Ebolavirus in western Uganda. This is at the border with DRC. And we examined at several time intervals before this event the neighboring Afro-montane forest and observed incredible ecosystem collapse. So this is just in the visible spectrum, but you can see the same area here, which is adjacent to the town of Bundibugyo, is virtually has collapsed in a period of 2 years to 6 months. And this is just in the visual spectrum, so we can then quantify that using our change detection algorithm. And we observed in that Afro-montane intact ecosystem, there are actually around 430,000 hectares of changed biodiversity during that period before the Bundibugyo emergence. And this is significant. The natural wildlife reservoir of Bundibugyo Ebolavirus is fruit bat, like many hemorrhagic fever viruses. And so what we saw in eastern DRC during this time period was a lot of human migration due to conflict, and this resulted in land use change, which disrupted and displaced bat populations and precipitated this emergence event in a highly populated region in Uganda. So what we're working on now, we've been able to use this process to characterize over a dozen different emergence events in the past several years, ranging from Latin America to Southeast Asia. And we observed similar trends in all of these locations. The main finding was that the greater the potential for change, the higher the risk for a disease emergence event. So what we're interested in now is changing our posture from a reactive stance to a predictive stance. So if we can observe changes in nature that help us forecast disease emergence events, we want to be able to alert regional health organizations in a timely manner so that they can conduct mitigation efforts and testing in those areas. So I'll leave you with this thought, and this is a quote from the group that observed that original trend and the increase in emerging diseases in 2008. They looked at where we were allocating our resources and where we were seeing disease emergence and determined that we were looking in the wrong places. And I think the availability of continuously collected satellite imagery going back to 1970 with the origins of the Landsat program in the US to what we have now, which is over 1,000 instruments in space, measuring everything from temperature to precipitation to soil moisture, gives us an excellent opportunity to change our stance from reactive, retrospective, to forward-looking and predictive. Thank you very much for your time.